TaxAct knows filing taxes can be confusing, so we have live experts on hand who can help answer any questions you may have. Questions like, can I claim my SUV as my home office if I answer work emails in my car? If I adopted 12 dogs this year, can I list them as dependents? And, am I doing this right, or am I doing this very, very wrong? Our experts have the answers to those questions and many others. TaxAct. Let's get them over with.
This week I'm talking about finding more balance in your life in order to improve your overall health and well-being. So, let's talk about mental health. This is Let's Talk About Mental Health, a weekly podcast about mental health and well-being hosted by Jeremy Godwin. Let's talk about mental health, because the more we talk about it, the easier it gets. Hello and welcome to episode 49 of Let's Talk About Mental Health, the weekly podcast full of simple ideas for better mental health and well-being. I'm Jeremy Godwin, thank you for joining me. Before I start this episode, I have another milestone I'd like to say thank you for. As at the 14th of October, Let's Talk About Mental Health now has listeners in 100 countries around the world, which is just amazing. Thank you so much to each and every one of you who listens to this program every week. I feel very honoured and quite humbled that you enjoy the work that I do and find it useful. So, thank you for your ongoing support. Now, enough about that. This is the third in a series of 4 episodes about the foundations of good mental health. And this week is all about finding greater balance. So, let's get talking. If you do a Google search for the term finding balance, you'll wind up with 1.17 billion results. And what that says to me is that not only are a lot of us interested in the notion of finding greater balance, but it also means that it's a real challenge to actually find balance. Otherwise, I highly doubt that there'd be so much content on the subject. There are lots of different reasons why finding balance in our lives can be such a struggle for many of us, and it certainly doesn't help that we live in a world that is constantly changing and evolving. And as much as we might try to resist change, it's as inevitable as taxes and lying politicians. The circumstances of today are different to those of yesterday, which were different to the day before that, and so on. And so we can often end up paddling frantically just to keep our heads above water in terms of doing all the things that we need to do every day. But what if there was a better way? What if there was a way to approach your life on a day-to-day basis that left you feeling more in control of the things that you can control? In other words, your own words, actions, and feelings. As well as feeling more confident in your ability to influence things that are outside of your direct control, and more capable of letting go of the things that are completely outside of your control. Well, there is. It's all about proactively incorporating greater balance into your life. And this week, I'm going to be talking about how to do just that. Now, before we go any further, I have to admit I made myself laugh while I was halfway through writing this episode because I completely forgot I'd already done a topic about balance all the way back in early January, which is funny because I have a list of the episodes sitting directly in front of my computer while I'm working, but I just didn't even notice it. I can't even blame Mercury retrograde as I came up with this topic weeks and weeks ago. Anyway, for a few moments, I thought about changing the topic of the week's episode, but 2 things made me decide to proceed with it after all. First, I reread the transcript for episode 14, which is available at letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au/episodes. And it felt to me like this program has evolved a lot in the 10 months since that was released. So there is definitely a lot more to say on the subject of finding balance. And secondly, I feel like 2020 has been such a challenging year for all of us that frankly, I find revisiting content that I created pre-COVID to be a bit like a quaint, old-timey postcard from a distant land. I think we're all continuing to be challenged to really reassess things and to consider what we really want out of life in a post-COVID world, even if it will take us many more months to get there. For me, this is a perfect time to really look at all aspects of our lives so that we can make changes for the better. And it's an utterly unique time that continues to force each of us to find greater balance and deeper meaning, while rejecting those things that no longer serve our individual well-being, along with doing more of what is in the best interests of our fellow human beings. This week's episode will focus in more depth around finding balance, and I will reference back to that episode 14 every now and then so that I'm not repeating myself. Alright, well let's start with some definitions. What is balance? When you think about the word balance in physical terms, it's about keeping yourself upright and not falling over, which I think is a fairly good analogy for the mental health focused definition of balance as well. It's about keeping yourself facing the right direction and doing what you can to minimize the chances of external events or internal challenges knocking you onto your butt. Finding balance means having an appropriate amount of time and energy devoted to all the different aspects of life that are important for good overall health and well-being, so that one aspect doesn't negatively impact on another. So I'm talking here about your mental health, physical health, spiritual health, social health, emotional health, and financial health. Plus, also mindfully integrating your work life into your overall life, because we've all got bills to pay. For me, balance is about feeling in control of all the different elements of my life and not feeling that one aspect is overriding the others. That doesn't mean that it's an even split between all 6 of those areas that I listed plus work, because things are never that perfect and exact in life. But what it means is that overall, I'm able to feel calm, in control, focused, and clear about what I'm doing and why. And if I'm not feeling that way, that is what I'm working towards. So I don't often quote philosophical belief systems, but in Buddhism there's the idea of the middle way, or the middle path, which is effectively about avoiding extremes. Too much or too little of most things can lead to problems. And so in this context, the idea of balance focuses on moderation. Let me quote from an article on Access to Insight, which I'll link to in the transcript, which draws from a traditional Buddhist sutra considered to be the first sermon given by the Buddha himself. And in the interest of time, I've condensed the quote here. The quote is, "There is addiction to indulgence of sense pleasures, and there is addiction to self-mortification. Avoiding both these extremes gives vision, gives knowledge, and leads to calm, to insight, and to enlightenment." And what is that middle path? It is right understanding, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And again, the link is in the transcript. Now let me be clear here that you don't need to be Buddhist to find inspiration in these words. Because regardless of your spiritual beliefs, there is a core message here in terms of seeking balance in all things. Too much of anything tips you into excess and suffering. Too little can potentially tip you into deprivation and suffering. A lot of this is what I talked about back in episode 14, as well as the idea of balance between your personal life and work life. And so today I'll be focusing more on balance in terms of those 6 key areas of health that I mentioned earlier, along with broadly speaking about how that aligns to your work. Now, just a few words here on the notion of work-life balance. I will be touching on this throughout the episode, but just touching, because I covered it in more detail back in episode 14. So I'm not going to dive into it enormously, except these 2 things. Number 1, I find it ironic that we even had to come up with a phrase to describe having a decent life outside of our work, because to me, it's just common sense. If your work defines you and your life, you're setting yourself up for danger because A, nothing lasts forever, and B, you're probably giving way more attention to your work than all of the different areas of good health and well-being, which can then have negative consequences on your health in the long term. So that's my first point about work-life balance. The second point is that money is a means to an end, not a reason for living. I know there are plenty of people who love their jobs regardless of how much it pays, so it is very much a case of each to their own. But my point here is that if the money associated with your job is a big part of why it takes up so much of your time and energy, then I would encourage you to question whether or not you're balanced in all areas of your life, which I'll be exploring further in a minute. So moving on, the idea of finding greater balance in your life is about being mindful of where your energy goes. It's about having clear priorities which put what really matters at the forefront of everything you do. In other words, your health and well-being, as well as your relationships with those you love. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and tell you what your priorities are or what they should be, but let's also be blunt about this. In an emergency, very few of us would prioritize our jobs or our possessions over our health and those we're closest to. And for me, that speaks volumes about where our focus needs to be in order to find greater balance in our lives. So why is finding and maintaining balance important for good mental health? As I said back in episode 14, if you live a life that is out of balance, then eventually it will catch up with you in the form of burnout, health issues, mistakes, damaged relationships, and even feeling dissatisfied with your life. According to Here to Help, which is a fantastic mental health resource from British Columbia in Canada, and I'll link to it in the transcript, feeling out of balance can add to poor mental health and make it difficult to concentrate, make decisions, feel confident in our abilities, and handle problems or difficulties. It can negatively affect our relationships. It can negatively affect the way we act. We may avoid or lash out at loved ones, use alcohol or other drugs to cope with difficult feelings, or avoid stressful situations. It can negatively affect the way that we work, at school or at our jobs. It can contribute to a mental illness and add to difficult feelings that we're experiencing, and it also can contribute to or even cause many physical health problems, and the link for that is in the transcript. So, at its core, the idea of finding and maintaining balance is about living a life that feels right for you. A life that feels rewarding and satisfying, and one where you feel grounded and motivated. So how do you do that? Well, let's get into the how-to part of this week's episode. How to incorporate more balance in your life for better mental health and well-being. So, like I said earlier, I covered aspects of this topic back in episode 14, where I encouraged you to be clear about your priorities. And the topic of priorities I explored in more detail in episode 3. And I urged you to make balance a priority in all areas of your life. So I suggest that you check out that episode for a much more broad conversation about balance. Today I'm going to be looking at those 6 areas of health that I talk about all the time, as well as how all of that fits in with balance at work. So all 6 main areas of health, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, social, and financial, are connected. And they are each influenced by internal factors as well as external factors. It's important to remember that what balance looks and feels like will be unique to you. It's not necessarily an even 6-way split on each of those things, or 7-way split if you want work to have its own focus on that list, which is totally up to you. Shortly, I'll discuss why I don't split it out to its own focus. Let's quickly clarify what each of those 6 areas of health are all about. Physical is about what you do with your body and what you put into it. Mental is about what you put into your mind and what you do with your thoughts. For example, we all have thoughts that pop up out of nowhere, but do you buy into them and then turn them into feelings, words, or actions? Emotional health is about how you manage your words, actions, and feelings, and how you deal with external events, including other people, as well as how you cope with challenges and setbacks. Spiritual health is how you live a life that feels purposeful and meaningful, and how you connect with something more than just yourself, which has nothing to do with religious beliefs. You don't have to be religious to be spiritual. Social health is your ability to create and maintain meaningful relationships with other people, as well as how you adapt in social situations. And financial health is your ability to support yourself, such as paying your bills, and potentially also being able to achieve financial goals that are aligned with your priorities. And you can find all of those definitions in the transcript at letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au/episodes. Just a further note here on mental versus emotional health. There's a fair bit of overlap there. I came across a great paragraph in an article by Pyramid Healthcare, and the link is in the transcript, which says, part of mental health is how well your mind processes and understands information and experiences. In contrast, emotional health involves your ability to manage and express the emotions that arise from what you have learned and experienced. So we'll explore this in more detail in a minute, but the first step that I want you to focus on is to reflect and then set clear priorities for yourself for all 6 areas of health. Like I keep on saying, this stuff will be unique to you, and only you can truly know what matters most to you in this life. So that's where you need to begin in order to identify what balance means to you. Look at each of the areas in turn and identify what your priorities are. So I will share with you a few of mine to get you started. So for me, physical health, my priority is about reaching and maintaining a healthy weight and managing my tendency towards emotional eating in times of difficulty. For mental health, my priority is to maintain good mental health every day. For my emotional health, my priorities are to be less reactive and more patient with other people and with myself. In terms of spiritual health, my priority is to do work that feels meaningful and to continue to explore the mysteries of the universe and my place in it. My social health priorities are to maintain mutually rewarding relationships, let go of one-sided relationships, and also challenge myself to do things that are outside of my comfort zone. And for my financial health, my priority is to support myself doing work that I enjoy. So perhaps all that was oversharing, but that's what I do here. However, I thought it was worthwhile just going through that and giving you an idea of how I approach turning my priorities into things that I need to do to find and maintain balance. When you do that and then you look at all of your priorities, you can begin to see that there's overlaps. It's not like the 6 categories just sit on their own and don't interact or overlap. And you can also see where there might be areas that you're not paying enough attention to. These have the potential to throw you out of balance. So my next piece of advice is about choosing to draw your focus back to all of your priorities and then taking action to create and maintain balance. This is about being aware of potential gaps or issues well before they become major gaps or issues. The earlier the better. When there's a problem, the best time to resolve it is yesterday. The second best time to resolve it is today. In other words, it's never too late to make a positive change, which in this case means realigning your life to your priorities to create more balance. I'd also encourage you to take a very long, hard look at how your overall time is being used. There are 168 hours in a week. Now we know that it's recommended that we get 8 hours of sleep a night, and don't at me, you know that you need about 8 hours a night, just the same as you know that you should be drinking at least 8 glasses of water a day. So taking out sleep, we're left with 112 hours. So how are you using those 112 hours? And how are you incorporating all 6 of those aspects of health? So sit down and actually break it down. So let's go through an example. Let's assume that you're contracted to work a standard 40-hour week and that you have a 1-hour commute each way to work, working a 5-day week. So that's 50 hours of your week taken out. Yes, I know that you can use your commute to do things like reading a book or catching up on podcasts. Hi to anyone listening to this on their way to or from work. But it's not always possible to fully give your attention to those things. So I'm just going to consider commute time as bonus time for this example. That leaves 62 hours a week. Since 32 of those hours will fall on the weekend, 16 waking hours per day, that leaves you with 30 hours during the week, which is 6 hours per weekday. So, what are you doing with those 6 hours per day, longer on weekends, in order to find balance in your physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, social, and financial health? Does that make sense? Take some time to look at how you're spending your time, and then compare that with your priorities and those 6 areas of overall health. It doesn't need to be a 6-way split and perfect amount of time. What it needs to be is making sure that you are giving sufficient attention to all 6 of those areas of health. If something is missing or it's just not getting enough attention, then you can look at different things that you might be able to do to build better health in that area. Okay, so with all of that in mind, let's look at some ideas for how to address the idea of balance in each of those 6 areas, and then I'll talk about work. So, creating balance in your physical health. This is about doing things in moderation and taking care of your body. That means maintaining a healthy diet, taking moderate exercise, being responsible and thoughtful when consuming things that are not healthy for you, such as sugar, saturated fats, and alcohol. It involves minimizing or preferably avoiding unhealthy substances like drugs, and ultimately remembering that each little action you take adds up to a bigger result. So that cheeseburger and fries may not seem like a big deal on its own, but if you take a step back and look at all the food that you consume over a week or a month, you can see that eating these types of foods regularly will have a much bigger effect on both your waist size and your overall physical health. So, finding balance in your physical health involves moderation in all things. You don't have to starve yourself and you don't have to deprive yourself, but it's moderation in all things. So, let's move on to creating balance in your mental health. This is about doing things like being careful about what you consume intellectually. So what are you doing for your mental health? Just like with your physical health, we talked about what you're putting into your body and how you're exercising. The same question applies for your mental health. What are you putting into your mind? And also, how are you actually exercising your mind? Just like with your physical health, what you put into your mind will have a direct effect on your overall mental health. So really take a step back and assess what it is that you're putting into your mind and how you're actually exercising your mind, and then make decisions that are grounded in balance and which are thoughtful and conscious choices. This might sound a little soapboxy, but I guarantee you, even if you think just turning on the TV and having the news on in the background is harmless, what you consume has an effect on you, whether consciously or subconsciously. So just be conscious of what it is that you're actually consuming. And I know I keep beating up the news lately, sorry about it, but it's doing my head in. I have a real issue with sensationalist reporting, but anyway, let's move on. Next is creating balance in your emotional health. This is about how you deal with your emotions. So look at internal and external factors here. If you're easily triggered emotionally, then it's up to you to do the work to manage your emotions more effectively. If external events trigger you, then it's up to you to find ways to manage what is within your control and let go of what is outside of your control. How do you create balance in your spiritual health? Well, this is about how you're spending time exploring the idea of being part of something bigger and recognizing that your existence is not just about you. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to worship a deity or sign up to a specific organization. If you want to and that's what feels right for you, great. But spirituality is not the same as religion. At the very least, it's about being aware that you are part of a human family and that you are intricately connected to nature. When you focus on things other than yourself, it makes it easier to do no harm, be kind, and give more than you take, because you realize that life is about more than just you and your wants. Next, creating balance in your social health. This is about finding ways to maintain the balance between connecting with other people in mutually beneficial ways and taking regular time out for yourself. Listen to the words that I'm using there as well. Mutually beneficial ways. Any relationship that is one-sided is doing damage to your social health and potentially your mental and emotional health. So creating good social health involves setting and maintaining boundaries, which is something that I'll be exploring in more detail next month, and addressing issues where relationships might be unbalanced. So I'd encourage you to check out episode 38, Relationships, for more on that subject. And then moving on, my next point is about creating balance in your financial health. This is about finding and maintaining a solid balance between your need to pay the bills and meet your financial goals, while also having balance in all other areas. If money is an issue, then I encourage you to reassess your relationship with it. I know that's easier said than done, and I know I keep saying that, and I know that not everyone will agree with me, but money is a means to an end and not a reason for living. Treat it as such. I grew up ridiculously poor, like so poor. There was, a couple of days before my mum got paid, we'd have nothing to eat in the house, or it'd just be dry toast. So I know exactly what it is to not have money. And I then know what that does in terms of the way that it can potentially make you think about money, that it's the answer to everything. It's not. The goal should be about having a roof over your head, being able to pay your bills and have security. And anything above that is gravy. And I don't think that it's something to aspire to at the cost of everything else. Anyway, so my final how-to point leads on from that, and it's about finding balance with your work. Now, I know I kept on saying I was coming to it. I left this until last because I hope by now that you can see how all the different areas of health that I've talked about actually align to all aspects of your life. So I really don't see that we need to have work listed as its own topic. Most of us need to work to pay the bills, and regardless of what you earn, it's your decision what priority work takes in your life. For some people, balance at work means leaving at their finished time every day so that they can maximize their out-of-work time. For others, it's about having flexibility to do their work at different times so they can fit it in around their other commitments. Do what feels right for you. But please just remember that the key here is balance and having clarity on what really matters in your life. Nobody ever said on their deathbed, "I wish I had spent more time in the office." So make sure you actually live your life for you, rather than spending it earning money for someone else. Because when it comes to finding balance in mental health, what it all boils down to is this. 2020 has reminded us of the importance of our loved ones and of finding ways to not just survive during challenges, but to thrive. As we slowly head towards a post-COVID world, even if we still have many hurdles to deal with before we get there, it's up to each of us to think seriously about what we want our lives to look like going forward. By focusing on what really matters to you and then creating balance across all areas of your life, you'll be better placed to handle setbacks while also taking positive steps every day in the interests of your own well-being. And that is something to be excited about. Each week I like to finish up by sharing a quote about the week's topic, and I encourage you to take a few moments to really reflect on it and consider what it means to you. This week's quote is by Wayne Dyer again. I quoted him last week, and it is, "Getting in balance is not so much about adopting new strategies to change your behaviours, as it is about realigning yourself in all of your thoughts so as to create a balance between what you desire and how you conduct your life on a daily basis." Let me repeat that. Getting in balance is not so much about adopting new strategies to change your behaviours, as it is about realigning yourself in all of your thoughts so as to create a balance between what you desire and how you conduct your life on a daily basis. Alright, that's nearly it for this week. Next week, I'll be talking about choice. Continuing October's theme of foundations of good mental health, next week I'll be exploring how the idea of choice fits in with well-being, since it's another one that I talk about a lot. I'll be talking about what choice is, why it matters for good mental health, and how to approach choice more thoughtfully for better mental health and well-being. I hope you'll join me for that episode, which will be released on Monday morning in Australia, New Zealand, and the rest of the Asia-Pacific region, Sunday evening in the UK, Ireland, Europe, and the Middle East, and Sunday afternoon in the US, Canada, and the rest of the Americas. You can find past episodes and additional content at the website, which is letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au. And you can also find Let's Talk About Mental Health on Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest at LTA Mental Health, as well as on YouTube. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform and tell someone you know about the show, because word of mouth really helps new people to discover the program. Thank you very much for joining me today. Look after yourself and make a conscious effort to share positivity and kindness out into the world, because you get back what you put out. Take care and talk to you next time.